All right, what's going on, guys? I had actually just shot this video, but I was holding my phone vertically. So just a FYI to anyone that records like any sort of content on your phone, especially if you're trying to put it onto like YouTube, you got to hold your phone horizontally, which means the long way, instead of vertically. If you hold it vertically, then it will not be kind of positioned right when you upload it to YouTube. Anyway, cut right back to the point. What I want to talk about today is heroin addiction, dope addiction. Now, when it comes to heroin and dope addiction, I'm going to be talking about that today, but remember that can always be applied, what I'm talking about here, to any sort of other addiction, especially any sort of other drug addiction. It just happens to be that heroin and dope, where I live at here in New Jersey, it's like a really big problem. It's super easy to get, it's really cheap, highly available, highly potent, and this whole epidemic has basically been fueled by the overconsumption, overprescription, overprescribing, the notorious, basically painkillers, Percocets, Oxycontin, you know the story. So luckily, all the laws now have basically changed. So it's really pretty upsetting to think about, but throughout the US, and again in New Jersey, it's especially bad for whatever reason, there was a whole overprescribing of painkillers. And so there was a whole generation that was able to get their hands on painkillers. Now, I'm just going to go into a little bit of story before I start talking about how I have firsthand experience dealing with this. But essentially what happened is there was really not a lot of regulation on the prescription of painkillers, so everyone was doing them. They were super easy to get. And you had a whole generation that basically grew up snorting painkillers or popping painkillers. And what ends up happening to anyone that has done painkillers is, you know, that your tolerance quickly goes up and you're looking for stronger and stronger ones. So, you know, you start with the 5s and then you do the 10s and the 15s, then you do the 30s and so on and so forth. So, you know, that's not sustainable because you're going to be spending all of your money. Well, dope is a much cheaper alternative. And, you know, now with it being laced with fentanyl, it can be as strong as you want it to be. So, and just a real quick point that I want to throw in right here, all the people that I know that have overdosed, and again, this is a dark video topic today. You know that I cover the whole spectrum and I ain't going to hold anything back here. So, and this is all firsthand experience that I have. And anyway, just throw that in there. But all the overdoses that I've generally seen are usually from people that have gotten clean and then they've come back and their tolerance has dropped and they try to do the same amount that they were doing, let's say like 3 months back when they were doing it before they got clean, and their system isn't used to it. I've said this for a long time. If you do dope every day, it's going to be really hard for you to overdose unless there's some like massive just someone who made a bunch of dope with a bunch of fentanyl that didn't know what the fuck they were doing. But if you had, the point is that a lot of that I've seen that are the overdoses, they come from someone who's gone to rehab, then they relapse back like after like a month or two of being clean or whatever, and they shock their system and then they overdose. Or they mix it with like benzos or alcohol or some sort of other downer where it's just like a super double whammy and it just fucks you up. But anyway, back to the quick history, then I'll get into my firsthand experience. So they were overprescribed for a long time, you know, early 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s, and even like 2010, 11, 12, they were really overprescribed a lot. So you created this whole generation of people that are now on the painkillers that have gotten their tolerances super high. And when I got into this, okay, so I was always, from the time I was about 16, I was just a partier. Throughout high school, I'd go to parties and it was just completely social. You know, I'd get drunk, smoke a little bit of weed. You know, occasionally I might do something a little bit more recreational, maybe a little bit of acid or shrooms or a little bit of coke or something like that. But that would only be like maybe a couple times a month. Mostly I was just, you know, drinking and smoking, and but it was completely social, you know, and I've always been that way. Like every time when I would do the drugs, it would almost always be in a social way. And I'll also preface this by saying I am completely sober now. I don't do any drugs, don't do any recreational drugs. So, but I do have first-hand experience doing every single one at some point. And I had ultimately periods where I do them every single day for months on end on massive binges, coke, heroin, and whatever, Adderall, alcohol, whatever it is. So anyway, what was I saying? The history, yeah. So it was overprescribed. Now you have a bunch of people that have switched over from the painkillers to dope. Now, when I did this, I just first got in, same thing like everyone else. 90% of the time when you talk to people that are dope heads, they got in from doing painkillers, whether it was from them having some sort of surgery or procedure where they got prescribed them, or they just had friends that had them and they were doing them. But it almost always started with painkillers, and then it progresses to heroin because it's much cheaper and really much more easy to get. So it's the same thing for me. I started doing, I think it was like Vicoprofen 5 milligrams, or they were like hydrocodones or something like that. And I started doing the 10 milligram perks, and then I started getting the blues, and then that was game over. Once you start snorting those were like 30 milligram blues, and your tolerance, or my tolerance was just skyrocketing at that point. And, before you know it, you're not even really getting high anymore, and you've essentially rewired your brain. So in order for you to feel pleasure, you have to do the drug, and you're doing them every day, so it's constantly in your system. You go even a couple hours more than you're normally not used to going without it, and you start feeling the withdrawals creeping up. And that's one of the hardest reasons why, I've come off of all sorts of drugs. Benzos are pretty hard, but definitely heroin, I think, is the hardest for me, and I think for most people, just because the withdrawals kick in so quickly. And the withdrawals are no joke. I mean, the longer you're on it, the worse the withdrawals are going to be. And I don't mean this to scare people, but in a way I do. And I've never heard anyone exactly phrase it like this or really talk about this, but this is firsthand experience that I have coming off. And this really applies to any addiction, by the way, not just dope. Time in equals time out. What I mean by that is that the time that you spent in addicted, like let's say you've gone on a binger for the last 3 months, and you've done it every day. Well, it's gonna take you roughly 3 months to unwire all the damage, or I should say rewire your brain back to how it should be normally. If you've been in for 8 months, it's gonna take you roughly 8 months to rewire your brain back. 12 months, same thing, and so on and so forth. Roughly, it's not an exact, 1-to-1, but roughly in that range. So it's going to take you time, but how do you do that, right? Obviously, it's going to take you time. It's going to take you a lot of energy. In the beginning, it's going to take you an insane amount of energy, right? I always use the example of like a rocket ship. In order for a rocket ship, spaceship, to blast off out of the Earth's atmosphere, it takes an insane amount of energy and fuel. But once it breaks through, it takes very little energy. And once it's in outer space, there's really no resistance. So you need to get out of this just massive downward spiral. And the craziest thing is that when you're I'm trying to figure out, there's like a beeping noise coming over here. I don't know what that is. Anyway, when you're coming out of this type of addiction, you're in such a downward spiral that I can pretty much guarantee you that anyone that's dealing with this right now, probably all of your thoughts are super negative. I wouldn't be surprised if you've committed a lot of crime to pay for the drugs, or whatever it is. I'm sure you've ruined and ended a lot of friendships that were probably good, and said a lot of things. And I bet you probably maybe thought about suicide. I bet you've probably thought about, really, really just demonic, depressing things. And you have to realize that your body has literally been taken over, and you can call this voodoo if you want, but you don't have to exactly agree with these ideas. They're kind of abstract, but essentially your body has been taken over by a really dark, low vibration energy. And ultimately, what that energy wants to do is it wants to spread to other people, and ultimately it wants to end you. and it wants to take you out. And again, you don't have to completely agree with all these, but just realize that when you're on the dope, you can't really live a meaningful life. And believe me, I have firsthand experience. I've been there, and I can tell you that your experiences in life are so much greater than just doing drugs. And when you do get clean, you should have the presence, and your brain will just be firing like you've never experienced it before. And just a lot of the little subtleties, and I know this sounds like corny, but like just like going for a walk in the morning and looking at the sun, or a squirrel that's on the street, and you just start to just get this really expansive mindset, and it's really incredible. But you're so contracted when you're on dope, and you're so asleep, and we're just so asleep as a society in general. And when you're on dope, you're just absolutely it's like a main line into your system, whatever. You're shooting it, snorting it, smoking it, you're just completely derped out. And you just don't want to go along with your life like that. And what you have to realize is that every single dope head, and this is really sad, but the first couple of months, yeah, it's great. It's like, I call it the cotton candy and carnival ride. It's great. Your tolerance is low. You're having tons of fun. You feel amazing. But that little phase is just a little quick carnival ride, and then you're going to quickly plateau, and then you're going to be on a death spiral. And it's super sad to look at these dope fiends that have been on it for 10 years or 20 years if they're still alive, and it's like they're just chasing that high. They're chasing that high that they got 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and they're never going to get it again. And it's just so sad, because not only that, but you'll get to the point where you're not even really getting high. You just have to do it to have even normal brain chemistry, so you feel normal, and you're not even really at that point even getting any benefit of it, and you've just been completely consumed by it. And it's just extremely sad. So I don't want any of you guys that to happen to you, but sorry about that. I had to sneeze there. I don't want any of that to happen to you guys, but realize that one of the keys is you have to realize that it's not your identity. And I think one of the hardest parts is you have a lot of these, I call it like you look at the dope as your safety blanket, where anytime something goes wrong, well, you always know that you can go and you can shoot the dope, or you can snort the dope. And again, this applies to any drug that I'm talking about. I just have first-hand experience with this, and I think it's one of the hardest ones. And I know it's one of the most deadly, so I wanted to make this video for the last couple days. But you've used this drug, you've used a dope as your safety blanket, so anytime something goes wrong, oh, the dope's always there. Well, you have to realize that it's just a facade. That shit is bringing you way further down, and the more you do it, the worse your life gets, which means that the more you then want to do it, and it's just a downward spiral. So we got to get you the hell out of that downward spiral. Well, one of the keys is flipping the scale. So in personal development, what you'll hear a lot is you want to tip the scale or flip the scale, which means you want to make it way more painful to stay in and do it than it is to take action. So once you get to that point, you have to realize that you just have to get off the track. Think of it as there's basically two tracks. And I've talked about this. You could be in the one track, which is in descension, in negative energy, low spiral, downward spiral, low vibration energy, or you can be in the other track, which is good vibration, upward spiral, expansive thought. We just got to get you off this track onto the other track. And you got to realize that it's not your identity. And again, it's going to take a lot of willpower at first. Your brain is asleep. It's completely asleep because you've been on the dope too, but almost everyone in our society, I would say probably, over 90% of people, they're basically asleep. Who knows? It might be 99% of people. Most people are asleep. So we got to get you to wake the hell up. Realize that it's not your identity. It's just something that you've chosen to do. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't matter how long you've been on it or how little time you've been on it. it's something that you've experimented with, or maybe you've done a lot of it, and that's, then that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's a chapter in your life, and we're gonna close that, and we're gonna move on. And you gotta tip the scale so that it becomes way more painful for you to stay in. You don't wanna derp yourself out anymore. You wanna wake up. You wanna rise up. You wanna get out. It may take you many times of trying this, right? A lot of people do relapse, but realize that when you do relapse, and I don't want you to relapse, but I do know that's a very realistic possibility. Realize that every time you relapse, think of you as, and I've said this before, think about you're building your core of presence, of awakeness, of living life, of experiencing, of making other people better, making yourself better. When you relapse, just think about it drawing you out from that. Well, guess what? When you get clean, you return to the center. Well, the more times you do that, the stronger your center gets. And guess what? Eventually, after you've done that enough times, your center will be so strong and you'll be so aligned with yourself that you will repel it. You won't even resonate with it anymore. In fact, the thought of even doing that will make you sick. And if you want to work with me, and I have firsthand experience doing this, I've done, I've been there, I've done it, and I know how hard it is, but I can tell you that eventually you'll get to the point where I could get you to pick up that bag of dope, and you would literally look at it, and you would be like, I can't believe that I ever used to do this shit. I can't believe, and you'll literally feel sick just holding it or looking at it. And once you get to that point, that's when you're golden. And that's when you can actually start living your life. I hope this video helped. I know it's kind of, in the parking deck, just holding it here, but it's something I wanted to film. It's something that's super important, and I know it affects a lot of people. I'll be making many more videos on this to come in the future. Now I got to go for my run. I'm going to run some sprints here, bang these out, and I really appreciate you guys watching. Hang in there. We got lots of work to do, and I'll talk to you guys very, very soon. Take care, guys.